So here we are with John Curran, the director of Stone, which stars Robert De Niro and Edward Norton. I understand from Ed Norton, John, that this is the first time he's ever worked with a director a second time, and the main reason he did Stone was because it was a chance to work with you again, that he trusted you so much.
Yeah, definitely. After Pain and Veil, we kept in touch, and most definitely we're looking for something to do together. I had shown him Stone because I was really taken with it, and when the first time he read it, he didn't get it, and he read it more as a friend. I wasn't asking him at that point. It was more like, "This is what I'm thinking of doing. What do you think?" And he kind of gave it a cursory read, and that was his response. And then it didn't work on that. It didn't work out at that point, and then it took me another year to kind of get it, another shape of it going. And at this point, De Niro was interested, and I knew I needed somebody opposite De Niro that was, going to have the chops to go toe to toe. And I really started thinking more and more about Edward for the role, and specifically because I didn't want to typecast the character to be a typical muscly, reptilian kind of inmate. I wanted someone, going against type. And Edward, when he really listened to me talk about the film, it was a big leap of faith, I think, based on our relationship, because he did like the way I was talking beyond the script. He didn't see it on the page, but he thought, okay, I can buy into that film, but we gotta do work to get there.
Well, he had worked with Robert De Niro before as
Yes.
well in a movie called The Score.
Yes.
So that must have been an attraction.
That was a huge attraction. I mean, that was, when I went, that's why I came back. I mean, knowing that he didn't like the script that much, or didn't connect with it just as a read, I felt like the only way I could go back to him was, if there was some element that was going to at least make him, be open-minded to having a second crack at considering it,
From what I understand, Stone began as a play. It was a theater piece, and it was set in the South.
That's
and
correct.
one of the things you said was, no, I see this around Detroit as a picture of sort of degeneration and debris and sort of a falling apart of things. And basically it's De Niro's a parole officer who, in a prologue, we find has got a Norman Rockwell life home that's punctuated by this violent outburst where he threatens to kill his little baby if his wife walks out on him. And she says prophetically, you have put me in a dungeon here. And he keeps her in the dungeon for the next 40 years while his job as a parole officer is to let people out of a dungeon, out of prison, literally. And Edward Norton plays a guy who is called Stone, and who comes and to see him for a parole, and it's going to be his last case before he retires. And basically he sicks his wife, played by the gorgeous Mila Jovovich, onto De Niro to try to persuade him sexually to give Stone a break and let him out early. But things happen and a transformation takes place.
Yeah, I think that, it starts out, when I read the script, there was that really horrible beginning that's almost maybe giving away too much to talk about it. But there's this horrific event that happens back in the 70s to this couple in their youth. And then you cut, and it's 40 years later, and I thought that was magnificent. There was so much that wasn't on the page that I wanted to know what had kept them together, and really it was their faith. And so the film does begin as a story about a guy of faith who's keeping it together, who's about to retire, who's a parole counselor, who you think is going to get conned by this inmate, which is how it begins, with sort of the bones of a thriller. But where it veered off in the script and where it veers off in the film is into something entirely different. The conversation takes a whole different turn. And that's really was my attraction to it. And that's why I'm really, and I hope that's the way it grows as a film, is that the expectations of it draw you in there in one way, and then the surprise is that it doesn't go in that direction at all.
One of the things Norton said that you had told him was, I don't care what you do, but when you sit down in that chair opposite De Niro for the first time, I want to see the least likely candidate for a spiritual rebirth that you can ever imagine.
Exactly, yeah. And he had some kooky ideas, like the hair was his idea.
The cornrows.
Yeah, which I was really kind of against in the beginning, because I thought, but then, the more we talked about it, the more we realized that the more extreme this character was as a goofball, you know, as a guy unlikely for any kind of release because he's so unpredictable and and lacks so much control over his own, you know. He had no restraint in his mouth and his attitudes, and he was mercurial. I mean, everything about him said he should not be let out, and certainly not anywhere near any kind of spiritual rebirth. You know, so the more extreme we could push him, the more fun it became in the beginning part of the film.
Now, setting it again up outside Detroit and Michigan to shoot it rather than in like Louisiana.
That was really the you know, you chase incentives. And,
tax breaks?
Yeah.
Michigan's got the greatest tax incentive of any state in the country right now.
At this point in time, yes. You know, and at that point in time, yes. And that's why we ended up there. But it was really fortunate because to be able to do... That was really ground zero for a lot of confusion and anger and fear in America in early 2009. You know, on one hand, Obama had just been elected and there's this great sense of an impending hope and change and positiveness. And on the other hand, there was a lot of people that felt that the rug had been pulled off from underneath them, particularly people of an advanced age about to retire. It was a very scary time with what had happened with, you know, pension funds, etc. And if any city was hit hard by it, it was Detroit. And we were there and shooting a film about a guy of that age who was going through, you know, a spiritual crisis. And we thought, you know, this film is never going to be about Detroit and what's going on here, but we can infuse it with some of the mood of that as backdrop.
Edward Norton also said, John, that he likes directors who make the same movie over and over again, and that basically your films are all concerned with the authenticity of an experience, of how true can something be to really transform us or change our lives? And what happens if we deny the reality of our life? That's what he said your films illustrate and study. And certainly that would be true for Painted Veil?
I think it's people deceiving themselves as to who they are and what they are, and then watching them hit that wall of realization and, you know, what ensues beyond that, you know, in terms of bad decisions they make, or, you know, I don't think I have a perverse interest in watching good people fall apart, but it's very human to me to see flawed characters, you know, almost stepping back and watching themselves and confused by their own behavior. And, you know, I guess I don't want to think I make the same film over and over again, but I am, you know, and who knows what I'll do next. But there is a theme in the films that I've made, particularly in We Don't Live Here Anymore, and this one I think are companion films for me. In that idea of an ensemble of characters all sort of trapped in their own. In this one, much more than the previous film, trapped in their own kind of prisons, you know.
Right. Things